we tend to overestimate how many hours we work. So if somebody says they work 70 hours in a week, the research shows that they're usually overestimating how long they work by 15 to 20 hours. And so when somebody says they work 90 hours, they're usually not working 90 hours. They're working more like 70 or 65 hours often. For every hour of sleep we miss out on, we lose 2 hours of productivity the next day. It matters that much. The work that we do is cognitive, right? It's less physical than it used to be. We used to just kind of move things from one place to another, but now we're doing this heavy mental lifting. And so if you can think more clearly, that's invaluable.
So there are studies that suggest that working long hours doesn't really correlate with productivity. And I feel like this is very contrary to this hustle culture and the grind culture that we're so accustomed to hearing about. So how is it that working long hours can be be anti-productive in a way?
Oh, I love this question. I think it kind of misses the whole picture of productivity. We tend to think of productivity as time management, and you Google productivity and all this time management stuff comes up, but there are other ingredients that we have to manage alongside our time. We have to manage our attention. If we can't focus on something, then God help us. If we have no energy or we feel burnt out and like we're just so fatigued all the time, we're never going to accomplish anything then either. So time isn't enough. And I think that's the thing that we kind of miss when we talk about working hours. And is a 4-day work week better than this? Or are we working 90-hour weeks or 20-hour weeks? Are we doing this? Are we doing that? It misses kind of this bigger picture of productivity where it doesn't matter how well you manage your time if you can't then focus and you have enough energy for what you have to accomplish. So it really is about all three.
What I feel like most people do, and I'm guilty of this as well, is getting validation out of that number of hours worked.
Yeah.
Right? Those like that 60-hour work week, the 90-hour work week, we got a lot of validation off of maybe telling other people how hard we work.
Yeah, because it's really hard to tell how productive we are when we do work with our mind. It's easy when we do work with our hands. If we're working at a factory or something and we're making widgets, if we make 50 widgets one day and 100 widgets the next day, the second day is twice as productive. We made twice as many widgets. But we all have days where, some days maybe we write 200 words and the next day we write 400 words. And then maybe we crush a lot of coffee and we end up writing 1,000 the following day. Those 1,000 words could be absolute garbage compared to the 200 or 400. You might have to throw a lot of them out. And so in this absence of being able to get a true handle on how productive we are, we tend to look at the shallow metrics of productivity. We tend to look at hours worked. We tend to look at how little energy we have once the day is done. We look at how burnt out we are. We look at whether we work more hours this week than we worked the previous week. But productivity is not about how busy we are. It's not about how much we produce. It's about what we accomplish, right? What is different in the world because we lived a day of our life, because we worked a day of our life? How is life more meaningful for us? How can we make a contribution to other people? So I think, instead of looking at these metrics of busyness, look past those metrics to what you're actually able to accomplish, because that's ultimately what actually matters with this stuff.
And it's tough. It's tough in those beginning stages because a lot of times you don't see those results. And something else too about, I'm sure this is the same with you. When the work I do, there's stuff that has immediate ROI that you can see the results, and then there's stuff that might take months in advance to really see the true results. But the stuff that takes them that you see in the months in advance end up being the most productive thing possible. And so how do we measure if we're being how do we measure our productivity when we can't see results? Is it more of just letting time pass and letting time the results tell, or is there another way we can tell when we're not seeing those results?
To wish into the wind and believe.
That's part of it, right?
Well, I think it really, productivity, when you boil it down, is really about one thing, and that's intentionality. So the more deliberate we become with our day, and with our time, our attention, and our energy, which are kind of the three ingredients that comprise how productive we are every day, the more we end up accomplishing over the course of the day. And so when productivity is about this deliberateness and ultimately this intentionality, I think we should measure what we are able to accomplish over the course of the day against what we intended to accomplish in the first place. And so intentionality should be the benchmark that we use to measure our days. So let's say, you set 3 intentions this morning. I usually set 3 intentions in the morning. And by the end of the day, you accomplish all 3. I would argue that you're perfectly productive in those situations, regardless of whether those 3 intentions are to, finish writing an essay, to catch up with a bunch of friends that you haven't talked with in a while, and to write 1,000 words of something else. That could be your intentions, or it could be to relax on a beach and read some book that you discovered, maybe a productivity book, and to just kind of like listen to the entire Midnight's album, Taylor Swift's Midnight's album, terrific content for a beach day. If you do that, and that was your intention, I would argue that you're perfectly productive then too, but you need some kind of, in this absence of being able to perfectly measure your productivity, you need some kind of ruler stick to measure your time against. And so I think that underscores how critical it is that we set these intentions in the first place.
In the book Mastery by Robert Greene, there's that whole 10,000 hours rule that everyone knows about. But he talks about how there's a big difference between 10,000 hours of just work and 10,000 hours of actual focused work. And that the actual focused work is what's going to bring mastery.
Yeah. And the research shows that it's about deliberate progress is the phrase that comes up. And so there's that word deliberate again. It's really that deliberate practice that creates the progress that we seek. And it really does come back to that deliberateness. The most productive people that I study in my books, in my work, they're not the ones who work on autopilot, doing more, faster in response to the things that are coming their way. They're the ones who say, stop. Let's take a step back. Let's figure out what we're doing here. Let's figure out the fact that I only have not 24, but 18 hours today, maybe 10 once you really get down to it, to accomplish something meaningful. And with this limited amount of time, what am I going to do? How am I going to enjoy myself? How am I going to focus so deeply that I'm able to make this contribution that lasts in the work that I do and to the world around me? And so it really, productivity, I feel, some people, when they hear the word, it sounds all cold and corporate, But to me, it's like some people think, I'm going to have to boil my life down to a spreadsheet. But to me, productivity is really about making that contribution. It's about getting more out of our days and giving more to others through our days. And so when you look at kind of an overarching purpose with this kind of advice, you realize that what's more important than productivity if productivity is about intentionality, right?
Something that I do, and I would love to pick your brain about this, is anytime I'm stuck or I don't know what to do, I actually ask myself this simple question. Right now, what's the most productive thing I could do at this very moment, this very second? And the thing is that sometimes, yes, it's prepping for podcasts, it's doing the business side of things. Yes, sometimes it is those actual work events, Then there are other times where I straight up ask myself, like, what's the most productive thing I can do right now? I'm like, sleep.
Yeah.
Get some rest, hang out with my friends. And so I feel like that's a misconception about productivity, is that it's just straight work all the time. But as we know, is that sometimes that can be almost counterproductive. And there is a value in taking a step back, right? And looking around every once in a while at what you're actually doing. And a lot of times when you do that and you look back, you understand that maybe I was doing the wrong things, or maybe that wasn't, the work I was doing wasn't so productive, because you get a bird's eye view of it.
Oh, 100%, man. And if you look at where our mind goes to when it's at rest, and so, we have these moments of activity throughout our day, but then once you stop, that's when ideas come. That's when plans come. Like, if you think back to when your best, most brilliant insights have struck you, your best ideas, your best plans, you probably weren't focused on anything. Maybe you're taking a shower, and then out of the mist, your mind connected a bunch of ideas that were swirling around inside of it. This happens so much. Our mind thinks about the future so much when it's wandering that researchers call this our mind's prospective bias. And research also shows that we wander to think about the future 14 times as often when our mind is wandering versus when we're focused on something. And so it's this kind of, two-step process in this way, where productivity, it's about taking that step forward and making the progress and doing the focus and putting in the time, the attention, and the energy. But then if you don't know the direction that you're walking in with the next step, you're going to end up just accomplishing something that's not meaningful or important with your time. And so it really is this kind of two-step process of making progress and then considering what the best way is that you'll make progress in the first place. And, a lot of us, we kind of, we make to-do lists, which are great. I love to-do lists. But there's something to be said, like you were saying, about that reflection in the moment where, throughout the day, close your eyes for a second and think, okay, I have finished with the previous thing that I was just doing. What is the optimal thing for me to work on next? You might think of something that wasn't on that to-do list. That's more important than the to-do list because it kind of stems from the thing that you were just doing. Or maybe you'll look at the list after that, oh, that thing is way more important. But it's this process of using this intuitive sense of what's important throughout the day, because we really know. We ultimately know what we wish to be doing and what we should be doing. It's just that it's often difficult to do that in the moment.
I feel like this relates a little bit to what we were just talking about that feeling productive versus actually being productive. And I feel like humans have a bad habit of doing things that might be a little easier, when the reality is those hard tasks that actually push the needle forward, we tend to avoid, but those are the most important ones.
Yeah, and for this reason, one of the best possible productivity habits that we can have is finding what we're resisting doing and running face first into that. Because
that's really hard.
It's one of the most difficult things that you can do. But if you can master that skill, you don't really need to worry about your productivity. You don't really need to worry about how much you accomplish, because the fact that you're resisting doing something is so often a sign that it's deeply important. And the things that are deeply important, it turns out when you look at the procrastination research that's out there, there are certain attributes that a task can have that make us more likely to put it off until tomorrow. So whether something is unpleasant and frustrating and boring and lacking in meaning and lacking in structure, these kinds of things are attributes that make us feel a sense of aversion to doing different things that comprise our day. So if we can learn to overcome that mental resistance. Mindfulness is an incredible way of doing this because, much as we can throughout the day step back and consider what's important, we can step back from our own thoughts in mindfulness and kind of go through them in a way and not be bothered by them as much as we usually are, and not have them be an impediment to accomplishing the things that we intend to do. If your day, if you fill it with things that you're resisting doing, you'll be so much more productive. You won't need to worry about your productivity. We can end the interview right here.
Yes. Well, what happens when you do tackle those tasks head on, that feeling afterwards of, it's almost like you're proud of yourself.
Yeah.
I feel like if you can find a way to make that the reward, is like after, like if there's tasks that I just don't want to do that takes like 30 minutes. And at the end of the 30 minutes, it sucks while I'm doing it, but I'm like, I just like have like a deep breath, like, okay, I did it. And like, I feel better. Like, I feel like I'm doing something really productive. Right.
Yeah. Like do the things that you will be happy to have done them. Not, so that's the feeling I think to optimize around. And there are shortcuts, by the way, to doing this more effectively. So one of my favorites, and so speaking of meditation, a lot of people put off meditation. They say, oh, I want to be a master meditator and I'll meditate for half an hour every day. And what they do is they end up setting themselves up for failure in the process, because there will come a day where you don't have either the time or the inclination to meditate for half an hour, and then the self-talk starts. You feel guilty. You start to, get up in your head about it, which is the opposite of meditation when you kind of think about it. But if you shrink how long you meditate for in your head until you don't feel that resistance much anymore, you'll overcome it. So you might think, okay, do I want to meditate for half an hour today? No. What about 25 minutes? What about 20? No. What about 15? Warmer, but okay, what about 10? Yeah, I can meditate for 10. And then you meditate for 10. And then if you want, you can go more, but you don't have to. There's no pressure. And what you usually find, it's kind of like jumping into a cold pool in a way where you never want to jump. And so you put off jumping and you have this resistance, and you go up to the edge of the pool and you're kind of leaning over, but then you go back again. That's procrastination. We have to just get to that uncomfortable feeling and plow right through it. And usually, kind of like the timeline of a task, it takes us like 1 minute to warm up to doing something usually, much like being in a cold pool. And so, you jump in, you acclimate quickly, you realize, wait, this is, what was I worried about? Because, most of the things that we worry about are incorrect when it comes to the stories we tell ourselves about our work. And the things that we should be worrying about never really occur to us to worry about in the first place. That's kind of a side point. It's really like, okay, get over that initial resistance and you'll find that there's very little left of it. So get started with something, then you'll be able to keep going with not a lot of effort.
Yeah, and to add to that, jumping into the cold pool analogy, it's like, let's say you have a daily habit of writing for an hour a day and you like hesitate to get started at writing, like you procrastinate it. It's the same thing you find is that once you get into it, all it takes is like 5 minutes, that all of a sudden you're rolling and you get into the flow state. So that's a nice add-on to that. That's the best way to put it. It's like jumping into a cold pool.
Yeah, it really is.
And like you said, you acclimate fast. It's just that you have to get into the practice of getting over that hesitation. I feel like.
Yeah. 100%. And analyze it a little bit, step back. Look at what's happening in your mind, step back from these thoughts a little bit, this resistance that you have to doing things. Because this is just, it's happening in your head. So you might as well be aware about what's happening in that mental environment, right? What are the thoughts that are coming up that are saying that you can't do something? What are the thoughts that are arising that are telling you that something's too difficult? Or what stories are you constructing? One big story we construct is that we don't have time for something. Books are a great example of this. When I ask some people, okay, what are you reading these days? They'll say, oh, I don't have time to read. But then, 10 minutes later, they're talking about the shows that they're watching and the things that they're listening to and the podcasts that they're watching and listening to. And I think, wait a second, I don't understand how to square those two things together with each other. And so it goes back to the ingredients of productivity, where we tell ourselves and other people that we don't have time for something, when really it's our attention that's more limited and our energy that's more limited as well. And so mind the stories, because so many of those are made up. If you're resisting doing something, that's a sign that there's something more complicated happening in your head around that task. And it's just kind of like, don't beat yourself up over it. Just get fascinated by it. What are the stories that you're constructing out of the raw material of the situation that you're encountering, and how can you kind of pick those apart and understand them a little bit, and then do the thing anyway? Yeah.
And that requires, like we just talked about, that daydreaming, that just sitting in silence, maybe meditating. Are there any other daily habits that we can use to improve our focus?
Yeah, so meditation is one, and starting your morning slow is another. And so, we tend to rev up our mind very first thing in the morning. In this spirit, one of my absolute favorite habits is to be disconnected from the internet from 10 p.m. to from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. And you might think, oh, no, just no. But this is my time to unwind after the day. I can pick up a book. I can pick up a book first thing in the morning. It's so refreshing in the morning to reach for a book instead of reaching for your phone. And you can actually wake up and cultivate a good, positive, constructive mental environment for yourself, where you aren't looking at like threats or comparing yourself to other people. One thing that sticks out from, it was Frances Hogan, the Facebook whistleblower. She was testifying in front of Congress, and she essentially boiled Instagram down to two things, which is bodies and comparing lifestyles. And so when we hop into algorithms, we activate this comparing part of our mind, which makes us feel like garbage a lot of the time, because the things that rise to the top of our feeds are the things that will make us feel as though we don't measure up. And it's so frustrating and discouraging to start your day in such a fashion. If you start and end your day that way, what are your dreams going to be about? What kind of tone are you going to set for the day as well? And so my favorite habit is just to pick up a story at night. Now, I'm a big nerd, so I often pick up a productivity book as well. I kind of dabble between the two different things. But that's kind of like a big focus hack, I'd say, is, mind what you put into your mind. Because we perceive the world around us through the lens of the information that we've collected and connected within the depths of our own mind. And so if you're just collecting and connecting information related to how other people are better than you, because that's what rises to the top of an algorithm, you're not going to perceive the world through a positive light. Whereas if you read about stories and ideas to better yourself, that is kind of a surefire way of sharpening attention, is to mind what you put in your mind. And so meditation, a great way of sharpening focus. Mind the stuff you consume, another great way of sharpening focus. And kind of mind that stimulation level throughout the day. So whenever we encounter something novel on the internet, so we fire up Instagram, we get a hit of novelty. We go on TikTok, and we get another hit of novelty there too. our mind releases a hit of dopamine alongside that hit of novelty. And so what that means is that habit becomes reinforcing. We always want to collect a further dopamine hit. And so we constantly seek out what is new and novel, bouncing between our stable of favorite applications. But this also leads our mind to be hyper stimulated and anything but calm. And so centering your days around consuming things that are conducive to what you want to accomplish and how you want to think and perceive the world around you. An incredible strategy, as well as minding that level of stimulation that the digital world will pull you into.
So what I'm hearing almost is that there's a lot of value in being calm when it comes to productivity. Because, I mean, everyone can relate to this when you're overstimulated. I mean, I have a quote for you. You said, overstimulation is the enemy of focus.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, when people go to their phones first thing in the morning and they get that stimulation right away, you're kind of setting yourself up for failure for the rest of the day. Especially with all the things in the world on fire right now. There's threats everywhere. There's anxiety everywhere. But I feel like what I got from what you just said is that if you can practice being calm and focused, you in a way can be more productive. And also too, you know, I think being well rested is important too. That's because when you're well rested, you tend to be in a better mood. And I feel like when you're in a better mood, you tend to be more focused because you're not searching for that stimulation from other sources.
Oh, 100%. And we, like, calm is not something that we seek, you know, because we want the dopamine. We want kind of the next hit of stimulation. But if you think back to when you were most productive in the past, you were probably not too frazzled. You were probably you felt like you were in the driver's seat and making this deliberate progress towards your goals. Like, let's look at the other side of the spectrum here. So let's say in 5 minutes, I told you that in 5 minutes, you have to give a talk in front of 10,000 people live in kind of a stadium style setting. And then at the same time, I asked you to read this research paper. You probably wouldn't have much attention to spare to read the research paper. Or maybe I gave you this research paper in the middle of a pocket of heavy airplane turbulence. You probably wouldn't have a lot of attention there, kind of in this threat mode, unable to focus on what's in front of you. Whereas, like, if we're at a spa or something and we're getting our pedicures, Brian, and you know I hand the research paper over to you, you're probably in a much better state of mind, just kind of like relaxing in that moment to say, okay, yeah, whatever. It's not what I want to be doing right now, but but I'll take a look. You'll have so much more attention to give to what's in front of you with that calm mind. And so even though calm is not something we seek by default, it's something we need by default, because that's the state where we're naturally more productive, and we have more to give to the world around us at the same time.
What effect does our work environment have on our productivity? Because I feel like a lot of people tend to have maybe messy desks, or they have the laundry they still have to do, the dishes are still in the sink. What effect does our environment have to do with our productivity?
It's interesting because a messy environment can make us more creative, but less productive. Whereas a very neat environment is more conducive to focused productivity and maybe a bit less creativity. Now, it's the whole like correlation causation. So, you know, we're not entirely sure which way the causation is working. But I think, you know, one thing that we have to realize about productivity advice is, you know, A, there's a lot of it out there, and B, we're all different, right? We have different personalities. We have different jobs. Some of us have no control over our time. Others of us have the entire day to roam free and do whatever we please. Some of us are extroverts. Some of us are introverts. And so our personality, our some genetic factors, some environmental factors, some situational factors, they combine in this kind of cauldron that we stir, and out of that comes the ideal productivity strategies for us. And they're different for most people. So this is something that, when you hear a little tip, I guess for people watching and listening, is when you hear some productivity advice that says you have to do things this way, and this is the way to work, and you should wake up at this time, and you should do this and that. No, just question the blanket productivity advice, because we're so different. There's these parts of us that are the same, but so much of us and our situation is different between us, and so what works for you might not work for me. And so I really think with productivity advice, we have to take what works and leave the rest. I think in terms of our external environment, a clean one where we have kind of cues around us that will make us more productive is helpful. So if you have a whiteboard nearby with a marker where you can quickly brainstorm things, it's helpful. If you have, notepads where you can jot things down with your favorite pens, that's helpful. If you have headphones nearby so you can enter into this distraction-free mode where nobody can bother you, it's helpful. But having an iPad nearby where you have constant things beeping and buzzing at you, having a phone nearby, that's another thing that I think a lot of most of us fall victim to. It really just kind of tugs our attention away from what we wish to be doing in the moment a lot of the time. Maybe get those things out of your environment for a bit as a bit of an experiment. How much more productive are you? Do you save time, which is the ultimate benchmark for productivity advice, in my opinion? How much time do we make back that we spend on these different strategies? And so stick with it, drop it accordingly. But yeah, it's funny also how much productivity advice sounds good, but isn't necessarily, it doesn't hold water in practice. So
what are some examples? Do you have some examples of those?
Oh, yeah. So one that immediately comes to mind is waking up early. And so there's this whole, idea, the early bird gets the worm, and we should join the early wake up club. And I will admit that with waking up early, I love the idea of it. I love the idea of being this super productive person that wakes up at, forget 5 a.m., let's say 4 a.m., and, meditates and reads the paper, maybe reads 2 or 3 papers, catches up on what's happening around the world, works out, goes for a run before the sun even comes up, never mind the rest of the world. But whenever I try this ritual out, I find I hate it. I find I have to go to bed when interesting things are happening and when people want to hang out and spend time with me. And when I want to spend time with them, sports happen then too at night. And so you have to kind of ignore all that world as well. But if you look at the research around this topic, it shows that there's no difference in somebody's socioeconomic standing, so their position in kind of how well they're doing in their career and stuff, or their productivity based on what time they wake up at. It really is how deliberately we spend our time after we wake up that makes the difference in how well we're doing. And when you think about it, it makes sense, right? If you wake up at 5 and go for a run and do all that stuff and then go to bed at 9, and then you have, you do that one day, and then the following day, you just shift all of that up by a couple hours and wake up at 9 a.m. and go to bed, 16 hours after that fact. What's different between your days? Nothing. Maybe you'll even have more energy on the second day because that's the way that you're wired. But we're all wired so differently. We all have different biological chronotypes. So when our energy spikes and when it plummets and when it's kind of in the middle, and it's so illustrative of this idea that we have to take the productivity advice that works and leave the rest. Whenever there's blanket advice, question it because it probably doesn't work equally for everybody.
Yeah.
And there's also the factor of peak productivity hours, and just related to what you were talking about, get me away from the mornings. Like I For like anytime I record a podcast close to the mornings, like I notice like I'm less focused.
Yeah.
Like this right now, like for people listening, it's 3:00 p.m. This is my prime time.
Me too, man. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that's the thing too, where it's like, yes, there's not one size fits all. And I know people who are morning people who can get work done in the morning. That's just not me. And it's probably not a lot of people listening to this. And like you said, that was a really good point. There really is no difference if you, let's say, wake up at 5 and go to bed at 9 versus wake up at like 7 and go to bed at 11. Like as long as you're up the same amount of days, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
A lot of people like to just like brag about it too, that they wake up at 5:30 and all that.
Becomes like a productivity status kind of thing. Yeah. And not to mention that like we have this guilt that sets in a lot of the time around this. And so like guilt is something that comes up a lot with productivity. And it often comes up because we're not spending our time intentionally. So when we're not deliberate about our time, these emotions like guilt and doubt and worry flood into our mind. Guilt being, doubt about all these emotions coming from the past, the present, or the future. Worrying comes from the future, doubt comes from the present, guilt comes from the past. And so, they come flooding in to fill this vacuum that a lack of intentionality leaves. And so, speaking from personal experience, in the past, before encountering this research that it really doesn't matter with our productivity and our wake-up time, but before it, I felt guilty waking up at, say, 9 a.m. one day, but I felt incredible waking up at 5 on a different day. And my days looked a lot like pretty much identical to one another, but the difference was how I felt about them. And so question the productivity advice that kind of makes you feel that way too, and look past it to how much you're actually accomplishing, because that's what matters with productivity.
And sometimes it's more productive to get those couple hours of sleep instead of forcing yourself to wake up at 5:30. And this is very opposite of like the self-help motivation advice you hear out there. And a quote that I heard you say is that sleep is trading time for energy.
Oh yeah. And I would even go further than that and say for every hour of sleep we miss out on, we lose 2 hours of productivity the next day. It matters that much. The work that we do is cognitive, right? It's less physical than it used to be. We used to just kind of move things from one place to another, but now we're doing this heavy mental lifting. And so if you can think more clearly, that's invaluable, right? If you can just focus more deeply, that's invaluable. And the research does show that we focus more deeply. We think more clearly when we get a proper amount of sleep, 7.5, 8 hours or so. And we can oversleep and we can definitely undersleep. But generally, when we get less sleep than our optimal, we lose more than that in productivity. And we become busier and we become more distractible. And we tend to more things, but we accomplish significantly less.
So I watched a TED Talk that you did around 7 years ago, and you said that you lived in isolation for 10 days. Can you talk about that experience and what you learned?
Before COVID. Before everybody was doing it.
Different time, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. Did it before it was cool, I suppose. Yeah. So yeah, I lived in isolation for, it was a period of 10 days, just in the basement of where we were living at the time as a productivity experiment, just to see what might happen. Because I thought, I'll be so productive down here. I can just eat my beans and rice and just write all day and read all day and get an godly amount accomplished each and every day. But what I found was that when it came down to it, I had very little energy over the course of that experiment because I had no people around me. And it showed just how critical it is that we surround ourselves with people as we strive to be productive. But not only that, but how people are the reason for productivity in the first place. So if you woke up tomorrow morning and you were the only person left on the face of the planet. It probably wouldn't matter how productive you are at work or how much you were able to accomplish at work. If you had nobody to share the fruits of that productivity with, right? So it's all about like having this overarching reason for striving to be more productive. For some people, it's about accomplishing more. And I think that's fine if that's really what you want. But for other people, for myself included, I'm very lazy. I'm fundamentally lazy. And this is what drives me to this productivity advice is because I'm able to accomplish everything I have to do in a smaller amount of time. So I have more time for the things that are meaningful to me, especially the people that surround me. And ironically, the time with them gives me more energy to be more productive later on. And so, that was an interesting experiment, living in isolation for 10 days. I didn't expect to really focus so much on people, but people were the biggest thing I missed in that experiment, and not having the energy of others obliterated my productivity during those 10 days in a way that I did not expect or anticipate.
And there's a lot of value in being with others. And I think one of my least favorite advice for young people that I hear is like, you should lock yourself in your room and just grind. Like, don't go out on the weekends. Like, in my view, it's like, if you actually were productive and did what you're supposed to do, like, it's okay if you go out with your friends for a couple of hours. Like, that you can't just go through your life just like in your room. Like, and the experiences you get in the real world by getting out of your room and being with people, I could argue is as valuable as that time sitting down working.
Oh, 100%. Like, never underestimate the amount of energy you get and the amount of happiness you get just by being with others. And you could be hanging out at a coffee shop or going for a walk or, getting a burrito. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You could just be talking to somebody. And even if things are quiet, it's fine. It's people are energizing and they bring this different perspective as well. Because we hear ideas that differ from our own, and we encounter perspectives and experiences that we can live vicariously through that other people have, that we can learn from. It's tough to learn as well if you're only with yourself. I'm speaking this way as somebody who was a huge nerd growing up. And so I loved locking myself like with the computer and doing programming and just nerding out about stuff, mostly like after the internet came along. But if I didn't have people, like I felt as though my days were less meaningful. And so we are living through a lonely time, at the same time where connection is rarer than it used to be. And so I find that these days I have to work for that connection. And so it doesn't just kind of happen as it used to. I have to put in a bit of effort to spend time with people because people are so online these days. But the more I do, the more energy I have, and the more I have to give, and the more perspectives I hear, the more I learn, and the better I feel. And so, there is this kind of like, you say hustle mentality, right? Where it's just, we have to grind all the time and never be happy. Where is that coming from? I don't understand. Yeah.
Yeah. And in this TED Talk, you did something a little different to that, is that you worked 90-hour weeks. How long did you do the 90-hour weeks for? I think you said you took like breaks. So you did 90 hours and you went to 30 and then 90.
Yeah, so it was 90 hours one week, then 20 hours the next, then 90, then 20. Yeah.
What was that? What was the 90-hour weeks like for you? What was that experience like?
Man, wasn't fun. It wasn't fun in the slightest. So first of all, we tend to overestimate how many hours we work. So if somebody says they work 70 hours in a week, the research shows that they're usually overestimating how long they work by 15 to 20 hours. And so when somebody says they work 90 hours, they're usually not working 90 hours. They're working more like 70 or 65 hours often. And so that was the first big realization that I had during this experiment. Because if you asked me how many hours I worked when I was working 90-hour weeks, I would have said, oh, over 100 hours, 110, 120 hours. And I wasn't, right? So A, we tend to overestimate how long we work, but B, our work tends to expand to fit how much time we have available for its completion. And so, it's kind of like if you have a few hours to spare at the end of the day, you fill it with something. And work is the same way. So if you have this 8-hour block that you work every day and you have 6 hours of real actual work to do, you'll find that parts of it will expand to fit that 8 hours of time that you have for its completion. And so, you'll spend a bit longer on, in my case, email, or you'll spend a bit longer on reports or writing this or writing that, even though you really don't need to. And so there is a certain kind of like bore out. It's kind of like burnout, but it's bore out, where you get really bored from what you're doing because your work is expanding and it's kind of diluted, and you don't feel this concentrate. It's kind of like if you have a summer job or something and you're working at a reception desk at a massage clinic. My wife had this job where she worked for a summer at a massage clinic, and there were 2 massage therapists there during the summer. And so what this meant is the massages were an hour long. And so there were only 2 people she saw every hour for like 5 minutes. So when they came in and when they were leaving. And so she had 50 minutes every single hour to just sit there. And she felt as though the days went on for forever, even though she had an infinite amount of free time. And it's this kind of same phenomena. So if you have that feeling with the work that you do, it might not be challenging enough, ironically, or you might be spending too much time on it. And so setting some limits of how long you'll work for, setting a maximum for how long you'll work for throughout the day can actually be a helpful strategy for cases like that.
Is there a number that you recommend based on any research you've done for how many hours we can work straight until it's time to take a break?
We should be breaking.
Is it different for everyone? It's different for everyone too?
It is different for everybody, and why it's different is it depends on how much we enjoy what we're doing. And so if you really find what you do tedious, you need more breaks because you exhaust your mental resources a lot quicker. Whereas, if you're in that flow state, you're fired up about what you're doing, focus is effortless, you could probably work for 2-3 hours at a time until you need a bio break or a break for a cup of tea or coffee or something. And so it depends on the work that you do. But the best research that I've found shows that we should be on break for about 25% of the day. And that sounds like a lot, but it's equivalent to a 1-hour lunch and 2, I believe, 15-minute breaks the rest of the day as well. And so it's entirely reasonable. But all I do is I just track how long I work for, and then I multiply that by 25% whenever I feel like taking a break, so I know I'll actually be recharged. And there's a great company that puts out surveys related to this called Desk Time. And they look at the time analysis of their most productive users. And throughout the course of time, the amount of breaks people take differ, the length of the breaks differ, but what the most productive people have in common is they break for about 25% of their day. So sounds like a lot, but that thinking time, right, that we were talking about, that reflection time, that goal consideration time, you'll make that time back for that reason.
What about multitasking? Because I feel like a lot of people get into the bad habit. I mean, it's tough talking about this because I can be guilty of this too. It's like having background noise or having a podcast in the background, or having the TV on the background, or checking your phone every once in a while you're working. And I've heard that multitasking decreases productivity by 40%. So what's the role of multitasking in all of this? Because I feel like it's right now at this very moment of time, it's never been easier to multitask.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I kind of have a more nuanced take on multitasking, because multitasking, it can be enjoyable, and I think that's what a lot of the research misses is like, yeah, it makes us less productive, but it makes us enjoy work more. So what's the best take given that? And so multitasking does make things take longer, but we can multitask. There's a lot of people say, oh, we can multitask, but only with things that don't consume our full mental capacity. So, who's to say that you can't walk while you chew bubble gum, while you listen to a podcast? I can do all three. I can multitask. I'm not going to choke on my gum. I'm not going to trip. I can do all three things at the same time. So if something is a habit that we can do without much conscious thought or intervention, it becomes considerably easier to multitask while doing that. So walking while having a walking meeting with somebody, it's a nice way of kind of elevating your heart rate and multitasking in that way. But where we run into trouble with multitasking is with doing things that are cognitively complex. And so if we're trying to hunker down and write something, if we're trying to focus in a meeting, if we're trying to just bring our full attention to a conversation that we're having with somebody, multitasking and interrupting ourselves as we do that, because multitasking, when we do something cognitively complex, is really just an interruption, right? Where we have to switch our focus from this thing to that thing and then back again. We're going to suffer the productivity consequences. And yeah, the study you mentioned is correct. Work takes 40% longer when we multitask doing it. And so something I do is I keep a distractions list as I work. And so there are things that I'll want to multitask with in order to stimulate my mind as I'm focused on something that I wish to accomplish, right? I'll want to check this app, or I'll want to check, how are my books selling this week? How is this? Oh, did this person email me back? I need to talk to this person about that. I'll just write it down on my distractions list so that once my current focus period ends, I just bang through the list. Boom, 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 and treat myself to this buffet of distraction that I had wanted to tend to. And distractions are very fleeting in this way, where you'll have the impulse to engage with them when they arise and when they occur to you. But the fact that you captured them on a list gets them out of your mind, and you stop thinking about them in the moment. So multitasking, it works, but only for habits. Don't do it when you focus on things that are complex, because they'll take significantly longer. You'll lose time overall when you do that. But if you're doing like data entry and you want to have an episode of Friends on at the same time, it might take you a bit longer, and you might need to double check things after so you did a proper job. But it'll make things enjoyable. It's so much more enjoyable. You'll actually feel good after, and you may need a shorter break after too, because you won't be so depleted.
And I could argue too, if let's say you do that data entry. I mean, so there are times where I have to do stuff like that, and I feel like if I had no background thing going on and I was just focused on the numbers, which I'm not a numbers person, so that's terrible. I feel like if I just did that and was sitting in complete silence, I would be more likely to get bored and pull out my phone.
Yeah. Oh, so exactly.
I guess so what you're saying is it really depends on the type of task you're doing.
Yeah. If you can do something automatically, you can multitask with it.
What do you think is the biggest misconception that young people have about being an adult?
Oh, I love this question.
This is my favorite question, yeah.
Oh, man. I think it's that adults are a lot different from being young. It's funny. If I look back at the drama that I felt when I was younger, and like the arguments people had, the things people got into conflict with one another over. It's funny how a lot of that doesn't change. People are still worrying about the same things. People are still, kind of troubled by the same things. They're arguing about the same things. Now, the arguments sound more developed because, people have had more time to accumulate experiences and things like that. But it's funny how little some things change. Oh, and another thing is how many people are pretending in their current situation. How many people are, there's this idea of faking it until you make it. So many people do this. And the people that sometimes rise to the top are the people that are best at pretending and just learning as they go and accumulating new skills as they go. They're the ones that kind of step up and say, "Oh, I'll do that. I can be not maybe necessarily because they know how, but because they know and are positive that they could figure out how to do that thing." And so it's kind of interesting to see people grow into their level of, how competent they believe they can be rather than how competent they actually are. They kind of, their ambition is one step ahead of the point that they've grown to. Oh man, I feel there are so many things I wish I could tell my younger self here, but like that's such a big one, is just how many people and how a lot of the things that are true about your mind will stay with you. If you when you're younger, you'll probably worry when you're older. And so like figure those things out. Bring some mindfulness to the way that your mind operates, and observe these things as they're happening in your mind, because you have to be in your mind for your entire life. And so like decorate it a little bit and make it a nice place to be. Like put some curtains up and like vacuum the floor every once in a while. Yeah.
You mentioned your wife. What's your best advice for maintaining a healthy relationship?
Oh, really listen to people when they talk. Wait until you hear the period at the end of people's sentences before you, never mind respond, but think about what you're going to say. Because, I think we all have this tendency where our mind constructs things to say as we're listening to somebody else say something. And if you can kind of set that aside and just be with somebody deeply and intimately, you'll make them feel as though they're the most important person in the world. And really, they should be, right? The most important person in the world is always the person that is right in front of you, right? Regardless of whether you're conversing with somebody or looking in a mirror. And so really listening to people and trying to think after people say things and not while they say things. That is so much easier said than done. And this is a skill that I'm still developing over time. And I'm not perfect at it, and I don't think anybody is. But I find that the more I move in that direction, the deeper that my relationships become in a really satisfying and happy way. Yeah.
And this goes back to this brings it all for a circle with the focus when you're listening, right?
Yeah.
Because not only by improving your focus are you improving your work, but you're also improving your relationships, in my opinion, when you actually pay attention to what the person's saying.
Yeah.
What do you think is a measurement of a good life? How do we know when we can look around and be like, okay, this is a good life?
So when I graduated from university, I received a few full-time job offers, but I declined them all because I wanted to spend a year of my life exploring my weird interest, which is productivity. Some people have normal interests. That's always been mine. And from the outside, everybody said, "Oh, it's such a risky decision. It's so risky." But in my view, the riskier thing would have been not doing it, because I would have had so much regret about what could have happened. And so I find that the more decisions I make that minimize the amount of regret that I feel, the happier I feel about how I've spent my time. And so I hope that when I get to the end of life and I'm looking back and measuring things, I think, I really don't have any regrets. I really took the path of least regret every single step of the way. And maybe my perspective will change over the decades that are to come in my life. And I hope it does. I hope I keep improving how I view my own life. And but maybe it won't. And so my current answer for you, we could check up in a decade, is that I've minimized regret.
My last question is, if you had a minute with your younger self, what would you tell him?
I don't think that I would tell my younger self anything. I think, it's kind of like when you go back in time and you fiddle with time, and so you change the course that things are going to take. I don't want to mess any of this up. One of my biggest feelings that I like to practice is gratitude. Looking around and just seeing and feeling things to be grateful. I'm grateful to be talking to you right now. I'm grateful for my wife. I'm grateful for this piano right here. I'm grateful to have this nice mic and this camera and this light that makes my forehead look a bit reflective now that I look at it. I'm grateful for it all, right? And so I don't want to mess any of that up. And to want things to be different is, I think, to not appreciate them as they are. And so I don't want to change the course of anything. I would just hang out with my younger self and maybe we'd play Mario Kart or something.
Just chill.
Yeah, we'd just chill. I'd bring a bag of Doritos and we would just play Mario Kart.
That's a great answer.